Hey, welcome back. Um, Today we're going to be talking about English colonization. Last time we talked about Spanish colonization. We saw how the Spanish came in the 1400s through the Caribbean, through South, Central, and up into the bottom of North America, what will eventually become the United States, spreading simultaneously empire, search for raw materials, along with Catholic Christianity. And they essentially dominated the New World for, almost 100 years. It's not really until the 1600s that the English get a foothold into the New World. So today we're going to look at how the English began settling into North America in the late 1500s and early 1600s. But to do that, we got to understand some changes that happens in England, specifically the English Reformation. Remember last time we talked about Martin Luther and how Martin Luther really upended the world in the early 1500s, breaking the Catholic Church up with this Protestant. Remember, Protestant means to protest, the Protestant Reformation. And when Luther did this, it split the Catholic Church eventually into a million pieces. And Luther wasn't the only one to do this. We saw John Calvin came after him. We saw, there were Swiss, German. Eventually, there'll be an English Reformation too. But the English Reformation looks very different, and understanding those differences will help us understand the nature of English colonization, which is really important. It's going to really help us frame some of the, larger interpretive debates about what early English colonization looks like. We really have to understand that Reformation piece. So, the English Reformation, started by King Henry in the early 1500s, 1530s, is going to look very different than the German Reformation that Luther started, right? If you remember, Luther was this very introspective. He's really focused on truth. He's trying to figure out what is Christianity, what is true Christianity, how does it differ from what people are practicing. He ends up breaking from the church. Remember, originally he thought that he could just explain, the truth that he had found, and the Catholic Church would accept it, and that's not what happens. And he goes from thinking that, the Catholic Church can be reformed, remember that word Reformation, to calling the Pope the Antichrist and breaking with the Catholic Church completely. So the English Reformation is going to look a little bit different in the sense that King Henry, the King of England at the time, is not so interested in the essential truths of Christianity as much as he is about having a male son that he can pass on his as an heir, right? Not understanding how science works, the king is going to assume that it is his wife's fault that he cannot have a son. So he's going to want a divorce. Divorce in the Catholic Church marriage in the Catholic Church is a holy sacrament. You can't just get a divorce for any reason. There has to be some pretty strong justifications for it. And so the king is going to look and say, well, I see these other people breaking from the Catholic Church. I'm going to break from the Catholic Church as well so I can essentially get a divorce from my wife. And this is what he does. And he ends up going through multiple, 6 in total, wives that will either be executed, he will divorce, and then eventually the 6th one will outlive him. During this time, he does have a male heir for a very short period of time, and this male heir dies pretty young. But under the first King Henry and then under the male heir, we will see the Protestantization of England for a short period of time. So especially under England or his son Edward, we're going to see some really Protestant things begin to emerge. Specifically, he's going to abolish the Catholic Mass. That means that church services will be in the language of the people, in English and not in Latin, so people understand what's being said. He's going to do away with certain things like the idea that priests have to not be married, so clerical celibacy will be done away with. That's a Protestant reform that happens. So there's a few ways in which England becomes Protestant during this. Now, there are the daughters of these jilted lovers of the king, right? So he's had daughters with these other women that he was married to. She ends up taking power in the mid-1500s. And when she does, she wants to reinstitute the old version of England, right? She wants to wipe out all of these Protestant reforms. She wants to reinstitute Catholicism as the official religion of the English Empire. And she's going to do this very violently, right? So she's going to get this name Bloody Mary. This is where the term Bloody Mary comes from, right? She's going to essentially purge Protestant Christianity from England. She's going to burn hundreds of people at the stake, kill Protestants across it. Really, it's like an English Civil War that kind of happens, right, over religion, over Catholics versus Protestants. And so when this happens, this is really, it's a counter-Reformation that begins to pull England back into the other way. And then after she is gone, we will see Queen Elizabeth, which you might have heard of, like one of the most famous queens from the history of England, right? And so Queen Elizabeth is going to again turn the tide, and so we have a jerk back towards Protestantism that happens. This is from the 1500s, really through the into the 1600s. England is going to be a Protestant country again, right? So this is where we get the term Anglican Church. That just means English church. Now, what's really important for us to note for a second is in the late 1500s, when Elizabeth takes control, when she takes power, she's going to be able to institute a period of peace where English people stop killing each other over Catholicism versus Protestant, at least on a large scale. And so with that period of peace that emerges, they're going to be able to turn their attention to the New World. And so it's not a coincidence that essentially what our English conquistadors began to make their way to the New World in the late 1500s and to begin to press back against Spanish domination in the New World. This first English settlement that happens in the 1580s, 1584, we see that Roanoke settlement on the eastern seaboard. And so if you are not familiar, Roanoke was the first English settlement, but it failed, so it's not the first continuous English settlement. Under Roanoke, we have this settlement that happens, and essentially they leave some people there. They're going to come back, and when they come back, they're vanished. So no one knows what happens to Roanoke. There is only a certain number of things that could have happened. They could have died of starvation, disease. They could have been killed by Native Americans. They might have joined Native American communities. We really don't know. Very famously, there is just this rock with this word Croatoan. We don't even know what that means, right? So Roanoke is the first English settlement, but not the first continuous one, right? It's a failed settlement. And then after this period of peace that's essentially instituted by Queen Elizabeth, we're going to have King James. And King James is probably a very familiar term, not King James the basketball player, but King James the King of England, that the King James Bible is named after. So this is another very significant Protestantization of England that continues to happen. So remember, one of the key points of the Protestant Reformation is it takes the Christian scriptures, it translates it into the language of the people, right? So the King James version of the Bible is an English translation, right? That's sanctioned by the king. And so here we're really going to be able to see strong, unified pushes into the New World, right? So under King James, we get the Virginia Company, which is a joint stock company that comes together. What that essentially means, it's almost like a modern limited liability corporation or something. It's essentially where people can pool their resources together. They fund a mission in order to go create something that will give them a financial return, right? So it's a business endeavor. And that's what the Virginia Company is, right? It's a group of people who are essentially pooling their money. They're going to go to the New World, try to establish a colony, hopefully create financial gain, and people will become wealthy. So this is really an important point, because if we look at the first colonial settlement, even the first continuous colonial settlement, which is Jamestown, right? The motivations of this is not to flee persecution from England, right? So if we think about these narratives about, American society, what America is built on, we will see that there is a colonial settlement, or numerous colonial settlements actually, that are built on fleeing religious persecution in England. But the first and primary, kind of the flagship one here, is not for that. The people who came to Jamestown initially in the early 1600s, they are trying to make money. And they don't have to flee persecution because they are part of the English church. They're Anglicans, right? So they're not being persecuted in England. So when they first get here, they're going to try to establish an economic center. They're going to try to create a long-lasting, profitable settlement. So when we come back in just a second, we're going to talk about what Jamestown is and how it fared pretty rough in the beginning.